Blog post 22. Why fathers are needed, what should all fathers teach their sons and daughters, and what the Stoics have to teach us about being a father. Hi, I'm Paul Baxendale, and welcome to another blog post. As bodybuilders, we're often flooded with recommended videos regarding various top stars in our sport, as well as videos on exercise technique, nutrition, and often drug-related information too. But I think it's all too easy to forget that we are also at heart men and women pursuing a hobby, or for many a lifestyle, which rarely is ready to give out helpful advice on how to also contribute successfully in the world, in the other very important jobs that we have and the roles we must honor if we are to truly to be able to look back on our lives and say that, yes, we lived a life that was worthwhile, noble, and that we leave a legacy that may be remembered for all the right reasons and not simply for building a great physique and attaining a room full of trophies. This week's blog post is another in my series on other life issues that affect us all, and one that I feel deeply about, in that it's perhaps the most important role that you may play or need your partner to play in life, that of being a father. Today's society sees children growing up in more fatherless homes than at any other point in our history, and it's becoming very clear that such an environment is having a devastating effect on both sons and daughters, and the women who generally are the ones left to become the sole guardian of the household, having to play the roles that were always designed through millennia of evolutionary biology and psychology for two to play, both the father and the mother. Now, before I begin to outline the trends in the impacts on children who grow up in fatherless homes, of course there's always exceptions to the generalized outcomes, but it would be foolish not to say that these are rare exceptions, and the data from decades of research show certain negative outcomes being more common in fatherless homes than in homes where both parents are present. But it does little good to simply outline the probable potential negative outcomes if some words aren't also given to try and highlight to both men and women how things can be made better should couples find themselves divorced or separated. It would also be wrong of me not to argue, as I have done in my videos on relationships, of the need to choose wisely in your mate selection, and once committed together, to stay with each other through thick and thin to make the relationship work, with the obvious exceptions of violence. But that still is not enough. For a father can be present in a family without really being present. And I think you know what I mean by that. You can be physically present, but if you're not emotionally and intimately involved in your children's lives, then you almost may as well not be physically present. And lastly, taken from the great minds of the Stoic thinkers and other philosophers far more intellectually and emotionally intelligent than myself, plus my own experiences of being a father, of all the mistakes that I made and all the things that I learned, hopefully there will be a conclusion to give you some help, some advice to learn from, and some words to think about, which may help you as you either continue as a parent or keep in mind for the future as parenthood hopefully comes to you as part of life's journey. For what job is there in the world that's more important than the raising of our children? Obviously, this video is going to mean much more to men than women. But if you are a woman, then I do think it's important that you realize the critical role a father plays in the raising of any children that you either have or may have in the future. And it reaffirms just how vital it is to ensure that the man you choose to have children with is living his life with those traits that have forever been associated with the greatest of men: honesty, integrity, virtue, courage, commitment to his purpose and to the woman he chooses not to just be with, but sacrifices all other possible or potential women that may cross his path, since he has given to you his vows of marriage or lifelong commitment. Okay, let's get right into this topic. And I think a good place to start is to share some worrying statistics that suggest that there are trends in fatherless homes that are strikingly worrying for the outcomes of children from those homes. Firstly, children living in female-headed families only with no spouse present had a poverty rate of 47.6%, over 4 times the rate in married family couples. Although poverty isn't the ideal way to grow up, that alone shouldn't be something that inevitably leads to negative outcomes. However, when you also consider that children from fatherless homes are significantly at risk of drug and alcohol abuse, and children growing up with their 2 biological parents have a dramatically decreased likelihood of having emotional or behavioral problems. Sadly, children from fatherless homes have a more than 2 times greater risk of suicide than those from homes with both parents present. From another batch of research studies, it's seen that fatherlessness is even linked to increased infant mortality. Young women from fatherless homes have a much higher rate of becoming pregnant also. It probably doesn't come as much of a surprise then that we learn that boys from fatherless homes are significantly more likely to get into trouble with the law and to becoming incarcerated. Interestingly, in both young men and young women from fatherless homes, interest in education is much lower, educational achievements are much lower, and that the involvement of the father impacts positively from infancy and uptakes in breastfeeding to cognitive, emotional and overall development of children's wellness and sense of self is also enhanced in the presence of a father. Biological studies have even shown that having no father can affect the brain chemistry of a child, and hence can have impacts throughout the entire lifetime of that child. One scary statistic is that in the US, some 70% of all inmates are from fatherless homes. Now, these are just the better known statistical trends associated with growing up without a father in the home. And I'm sure you can imagine the emotional impacts it must also have. But how common is the situation today? Well, in the US, some 17.4 million children are growing up in fatherless homes, as at the last census. Again, the census also showed some 7 million men were not only living away from their children, but they had no contact at all with their children. One of the leading reasons for fathers not being present in the lives of their children was divorce. But a high percentage had never been married and had simply chosen not to become involved in their offspring's lives. There are cases of women preventing fathers from being present and involved in their children's lives. But the vast majority are simply out of choice by the men, which sadly had a generational trend becoming seen where one fatherless boy grows up to become uninvolved in his own children's lives too. So in summary, let me outline some of the major negative impacts on children and therefore consequently on society when a home is without a father. Children's diminished self-concept and compromised physical and emotional security. Children consistently report feeling abandoned when their fathers are not involved in their lives, struggling with their emotions and episodic bouts of self-loathing. Behavioral problems. Fatherless children have more difficulties with social adjustment and are more likely to report problems with friendships and manifest behavioral problems, many developing a swaggering, intimidating persona in an attempt to disguise their underlying fears, resentments, anxieties, and unhappiness. Truancy and poor academic performance. 71% of high school dropouts are fatherless children. Fatherless children have more trouble academically, scoring poorly on tests of reading, mathematics, and thinking skills. Children from father-absent homes are more likely to play truant from school, more likely to be excluded from school, more likely to leave school at age 16, and less likely to attain academic and professional qualifications in adulthood. Delinquency and youth crime, including violent crime, 85% of youth imprisoned have an absent father. Fatherless children are more likely to offend and go to jail as adults. Promiscuity and teen pregnancy. Fatherless children are more likely to experience problems with sexual health, including a greater likelihood of having intercourse before the age of 16, foregoing contraception during first intercourse, becoming teenage parents, and contracting sexually transmitted infections and diseases. Girls manifest an object hunger for males, and in experiencing the emotional loss of their fathers, egocentrically, as a rejection of them, become susceptible to exploitation by adult men. Drug and alcohol abuse. Fatherless children are more likely to smoke, to drink alcohol, and to abuse drugs in childhood and adulthood. Homelessness. 90% of runaway children have an absent father. Exploitation and abuse. Fatherless children are at a greater risk of suffering physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, being 5 times more likely to have experienced physical abuse and emotional maltreatment, with a 100 times higher risk of fatal abuse. A recent study reported that preschoolers not living with both their biological parents are 40 times more likely to be sexually abused. Physical health problems. Fatherless children report significantly more psychosomatic health symptoms and illness, such as acute and chronic pain, asthma, headaches, and stomach aches. Mental health disorders. Father-absent children are consistently overrepresented on a wide range of mental health problems, particularly anxiety, depression, and suicide. Life chances. As adults, fatherless children are more likely to experience unemployment, have low incomes, remain on social assistance, and experience homelessness. future relationships. Father-absent children tend to enter partnerships earlier, are more likely to divorce or dissolve their cohabiting unions, and are more likely to have children outside marriage or outside any partnership. Mortality. Fatherless children are more likely to die as children and live an average of 4 years less over an average lifespan. So I think it's fair to say that most people, unless they're under the spell of some ideological dreamscape, would agree that having both parents in the household as their children is beneficial to the child, both emotionally, physically, and psychologically. But I would like to pose another level to that of the absent father, that of the father that is physically present but who isn't fully present in their children's lives, whether through lack of perceived time, exhaustion through work, or simply not being aware of how damaging his lack of presence is to his children if he isn't completely engaged in their lives. I'm sure we've all heard grandparents talk about how great it is to have their grandchildren around. And not because they can hand them back at the end of the day, as many people humorously add, but because they now have the time to really be present in those children's play hours, learning and becoming involved at such a level that, particularly as fathers, they felt they never had the time. Or was it that they never made the time? Now, I'm the father of 4 children myself, and I look back on the early years of their lives, and I realize that I was so busy with my work that the priority I gave to them was second best, and frankly, just not good enough. That was one of the blessings that came out of my accident, that I had to completely reevaluate my life in terms of who I was. My role as husband, father, was still the same, and yet I could no longer provide or protect them as I used to. But was that really the case? As it turned out, no, it wasn't. Through several years of self-analysis and much reading and learning from the great words of history, literature, and philosophy, I discovered that I needed to reinvent myself. What had been my passion and profession for nearly all of my working life simply had to be replaced with something else that I was just as incredibly passionate about. And some 10 years later, after the accident, I find myself now an academic for a university. Still a bodybuilder, but not now one who lives his life around the sport, but who has realized that his purpose and his family are truly the most important things in any man's life, if he wishes to leave the legacy he was always meant to leave. So I had a lot of learning to do and a lot of time to make up for. But I was also blessed with my eldest daughter having given birth to our first grandchild, and then some 18 months later, our second. So I was in effect given a second chance to cover those early years of development that I hadn't been as present for as I should have been. But now I have the chance to teach my son and daughters the things that I believe every father should teach their children, and also engage in play and early years learning with my grandchildren. What exactly I believe fathers should teach their sons and daughters, I'll cover in a little bit of detail, as I honestly don't think I can think of any role more important than that of teaching our children the fundamental principles that I believe our young men and women should live their lives by. Now, I'm not saying that I know all the answers, Heck, I hardly hold my hand up to knowing the basics. But if the basics is all that you have, then teach them whatever you do. For what can be more important than your daughters and your sons growing up with key values and ethics that you believe are integral to being the best person you can be? And yes, I do believe it differs for young men and young women. After my accident, I found the most useful and powerful school of philosophy was the Stoic school. In it, I found a vast literature of the writings of great thinkers, most from the Greek and Roman civilizations. That a school of philosophy could bring not just comfort and power to me as a disabled man struggling to find his purpose, but one that was as relevant today as it was when it was first written some 2,000 years ago, just seems remarkable. But I think that it does find relevance in today's society, just as it did in Roman times. That, I think, attests the truth to it. So it was one of my first writings to go back to when I vowed to become the very best father that I could be. So what did the Stoics say about fatherhood, if anything specific at all? Well, sadly, as with much of historical writing of past millennia, many volumes have been destroyed through history without any records being taken on them, such as Seneca writing an entire book on his father. However, what we do find is writings by Seneca's father that had been handed down to him almost as a handbook on life, as the father in Roman society had a much more powerful role than he does in today's society. Back then, he literally had the power of life or death over his children. And although this wasn't something that was done in normal Roman society, we do find that the Romans believed the father's role was very much that of a teacher, and perhaps even more importantly, as a role model. You see, it's something that I've observed and learnt in my own children and parenting. You can tell your children how to behave until the cows come home. But, and here's the important part, if you say one thing, but then act differently yourself, your children will see it. They know. For children watch everything you do, and I mean everything. And a lot of that you're not even aware of. But trust me, they're watching you all the time. So if you ask them to behave in a certain way, but then you're contradicting what you've just said in your own behavior, they're not going to listen to your words. They're going to look at your actions and think that if you do something, then it must be okay to do it. So becoming a role model is by far the most important way that you can teach your children. But in saying that, it can also help to tell them things of great importance, which you can then back up by your behavior. Now there's a winning way of teaching. Role models were of vital importance to Stoics, and young men would live their lives with a view to set up a legacy by which future generations of their family could look back on their lives and emulate and become a role model. The Stoics went against the traditional Roman hierarchy of father-son relationships, since they believed in equality amongst moral agents. But the father would use an almost game-like method by which he would play moral improvements by which to nudge his son to outdo him, and therefore in doing so they would both improve, and they also both kept their equal status. Seneca thought that the best thing a father could give his children was virtue, and they in turn could pass on an even greater virtue to their children. It went against Roman society as much as it does today, in that today fathers' inheritances are mainly measured in wealth, not in virtue. So what virtues are there that we must teach our children? Well, the Stoics believe that what we taught our children was then absorbed into their DNA, becoming their fate, so to speak. And we must believe that too. Otherwise, why would we as parents be so concerned about what schools our children go to? Why we monitor their behavior so closely? And why we spend the time that we do with them? But are we spending enough time with children today? Or are some people passing off that responsibility of teaching their children's ethics, values and morals to others? If you heard some of what they taught at school today, perhaps you would be more concerned about teaching them yourself. Perhaps some personal examples would be good to hear, however humbling they may be to me. For I was guilty of the present father, but not really being present, with the excuses of work, of training, of competitions, of, well, I could name 100, but they'd all be excuses at the end of the day. If I had known just how important those years were to my children, I definitely would have been more present. However, the one thing I did do that was positive was to be a role model for both a healthy lifestyle and a healthy, loving, committed relationship. Although never once encouraging any one of my 4 children to ever go to the gym or to eat healthily, they all do. 2 of whom train really seriously and may even compete. But that's irrelevant. What's important is that they exercise regularly and that they eat whole foods. This may seem incredible in this day and age, but not one of my children has ever been to a McDonald's. Well, no, that isn't strictly true. My apologies. 2 have been to a McDonald's, but they neither ate nor drank anything. They're all confident children. They're now adults with healthy self-esteem, and all of them, except my eldest daughter, still live at home, which we're only too happy about, since we know they will leave when they're ready to do so. All of them only ever have been in committed long-term relationships, and none of them have ever been in casual relationships. And it's not as though we lay down rules for them. We've simply explained the reasons why we believe casual relationships are unhealthy and dangerous to their long-term happiness, and why they should never settle for anyone less than that what they are worthy for. Yes, that means that the girls finding boyfriends difficult, often dismayed at the behavior of young men around them. But one day they will find that someone just right, just as my eldest daughter has done, who she now has 2 beautiful children with. So despite my failings, they still managed to turn out great. So imagine how things might be if you were really present for all of their childhood and got to interact with them every single day. I'm very conscious that my son watches everything I do, whether it's with my training or, more importantly, life. He watches how I interact with people, how I speak to them, or if I feel someone is a negative influence around me, I just won't have anything to do with them at all. And if they push their luck and try and come into my personal space or my family's space, then they soon know that it's an error to do so. He too has learned not to follow the crowd or the training programs of the other young guys at the gym. He researches himself. Now, I'm always there to answer any questions, of course, but I'm happy that he finds his own way and his own individual methods of training and living that suit him, as long as he maintains the golden rules of Stoic values. Then he is free to go and pursue whatever path he wishes to follow. I do expect him to be honest, kind, courageous, virtuous, and have virtue and integrity. Not easy for a young man of 17, but he is doing me proud. I've been very lucky, but also have done some things right too. Firstly, as I said earlier, get your own act in order. How can you expect your children to behave virtuously if you yourself are acting in ways that are unvirtuous? Become the man you wish your son to be and your daughter to love, so that she sees for herself positive, true masculinity in a man, so she will know when to recognize it in her choices of partner in the future. Praise their attempts, not simply their successes. For as Aurelius wrote, a man becomes both better, if one may say so, and more worthy of praise by making a right use of these accidents. You see, the Stoics believe praise should be given to those who try, fail, and learn. Give praise when your child tries something. Urge them to continue when they fail, and praise them for not giving up when they succeed. It's the difference between saying, "You're so smart," as if their accomplishment was a natural occurrence, and "You worked so hard," which suggests that they earned their triumph. Never, if you can at all help it, become angry with your child. Now, I know it's not an easy thing to do when you have a dozen things to do and they're misbehaving. But as Seneca wrote, this rather is what you should think, that no one should be angry at the mistakes of men. For tell me, should one be angry at those who move with stumbling footsteps in the dark? With those who do not heed commands because they're deaf? With children because, forgetting the observance of their duties, they watch the games and foolish sports of their playmates? Would you want to be angry with those who become weary because they are sick or growing old? That you may not be angry with individuals. You must forgive mankind at large. You must grant indulgence to the human race. And as Aurelius said, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Now, those are wise words. Gratitude is one of the most important gifts that you can give to yourself and as a teaching to your children. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Another invaluable teaching that you can give both your sons and your daughters is that of reflection on yours and theirs own days and their actions, making them accountable to those highest values of honesty, integrity, honor, courage, patience, and virtue that they can account themselves to, and also for you to do also. Allow not to sleep to close your wearied eyes until you have reckoned up each daytime deed. Where did I go wrong? What did I do? And what duties left undone? From first to last review your acts, and then reprove yourself for wretched or cowardly acts, but rejoice in those well done. Without fathers to be the role model for all of these traits in the adult masculine male, then they will be more likely to seek peer advice and also to be succumbed by peer pressure, should it be something that they instinctively know to be right, to be wrong or dangerous. Fathers should not litter their children with flattery or presents, especially when trying to make up for time not being spent with them. For your children know deep down what you are doing, and giving your children things easily does not prepare them well for real life and the real life that they will live ahead. Childhood, therefore, should be kept far from contact with flattery. Let a child hear the truth. Sometimes even let him fear. Let him be respectful always. Let him rise before his elders. Let him gain no quest by anger. When he is quiet, let him be offered what was refused when he wept. Let him, moreover, have the sight, but not the use of his parents' wealth. When he has done wrong, let him be reproved. Above all, let his food be simple, his clothing inexpensive, and his style of living like that of his companions. The boy will never be angry at someone being counted equal to himself, whom you have from the first treated as the equal of many. So then we know some of the principles of being a father according to Seneca and Stoicism. In practical terms then, how can this be taught? Well, as I said earlier, there's no better way to teach a child, a son or a daughter, than by ensuring that your own behavior is itself deeply embedded in the virtues that you wish to see in them. Honesty is perhaps the most important one of these. For when you lie, you lose respect for yourself, and you know that. Life starts to become that little bit more complicated until eventually it will become a web of lies, truths, and create a persona that no one will be able to trust, including yourself. If you tell people that you drink 1 glass of wine a day, but you actually drink 3, you've just begun the collapse of your character. For if your children hear you say this to anyone, and they know that you do actually drink more than that, what lesson are they going to learn? Then it's okay to lie about the things that I don't want people to know about? Then it becomes lies to cover the things that you do that you don't want people to know. And each lie crumbles a little piece of your true essence as you do so. Yes, honesty is the number one value to live your life by and to instill into your children. And it won't be difficult so long as you don't criticize or punish them for when they do tell you the truth. For if you do that, you're simply giving them the message that when they tell the truth, they get punished. Yes, you may be disappointed, even angry about the truth, but don't punish them for the truth. Instead, give them a learning opportunity to explain why they did what they did and whether they think it will serve them in their lives as they get older. Integrity and courage are often needed in conjunction with each other. When you disagree with something that someone around you is saying or doing, then you have to tell the truth and stand up for what it is that you believe in or what you believe the truth to be. Now, it takes courage to do this, but courage is built just like your muscles are, with a little stress and reps every day, which in turn will make your courage grow stronger and able to withstand more stress. When you think about it, the vast majority of the population, they're not geniuses. So why should you go along with what everybody else does or what everybody else believes or thinks? I'm not saying to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. That's ridiculous. But always be in control of your own decisions and your own beliefs. And if it means doing some work and some research to find out what you don't know about a subject, then do the work and research. Remember, there was a time when everyone thought that the earth was flat. Well, some still do, which is their prerogative. There was a time when doctors believed that cigarettes were good for your lungs and prescribed them to elite cyclists. No matter the theme, the behavior, the voices that are heard, make sure you do your own learning. Read or listen to people with greater knowledge than you. Don't think that you know it all, or that any one person, whether a politician or a doctor or a friend, has all the answers, when their primary objective and outcome very well may not be your well-being. Teach your sons integrity, honesty, virtue and courage, and to live their lives to reason, not to their emotions, another basic Stoic principle. So they do not live their lives running to the urges of their base emotions or desires for instant gratification. Teach them that if they want something of great value, whether it's in their careers or their wife, then they themselves must be worthy of such valuable things. Teach them that with great authority comes great responsibility, and would they prefer to be men of great authority, or just one of the millions of men whose lives will come and go without anyone remembering them? Remember the young Romans who wished to create such virtue that their legacies would be remembered by future generations long into the future. Well, that doesn't come easy, nor without sacrifice, or bypassing instant gratification for the glory of long-deserved virtue, reputation, and legacy. The same goes for your daughters. They will look to you as their father, as the major role model of masculinity and what it is to be a man, and what they themselves may look for in a long-term committed relationship. If you don't live the life you know you should be living, then don't be surprised if they don't try and go against what you tell them to do, how to behave, and how to live as they see through your lies just as easily as your own brain does. Make them strong, courageous, and virtuous, so that when they see men of poor integrity, they simply find it unmasculine and unattractive. If they see virtues of honesty, courage, integrity, honor in you as their father, then there is more of a chance that they will wish to find those same qualities in their own partners. And should society tell them that they can have everything, they can have the top career, the beautiful looks, the great physique, the happy and healthy family, then they will know that society is lying to them, as each one of those things carries a weight of a lifetime on its own. How can you be the mother of children, which is the most important job in the world, and the boss of a top company? Something's going to have to give. If you think you can work 80 hours a week and breastfeed your baby infant, be there giving the maternal love it needs to survive and to thrive, then you must be using a different calculator than the one I am. Your daughters need to know that they are valuable, that they possess the feminine divine, the only force in nature that can create. Her worth is and can never be measured in likes or followers or friends on social media, but in the way she lives her own life. I'm not and never would say how anyone should live their lives, but just make sure it is what you want, not what society tells you what you think you should want. So I think we would all agree that there is a massive problem in Western society with fatherless homes. And despite all the exceptional cases where tragic events has happened, which no one can control, the vast majority of these homes are when the father has made the decision, for whatever reason, not to live as a committed partner and a full-time father to his children. Now, what can we do about it? Well, the problem isn't of the making of a few years, but of decades and perhaps over half a century of societal change. So is there anything that we can now do to reverse the trend? Well, all anyone can do is control their own lives. And although some may argue that governments have allowed this change to occur without major consequences for either the mother or the father, I wouldn't want to see countries not offering a safety net to anyone who needs support either. And the solution must come from within, from one person to the next and so forth, until once again the Stoic values of honor, integrity, virtue, honesty and courage are valued truly once again. The funny thing is that those values are valued. It's just that people, and I'll call men out on this firstly, but it is both men and women, men must once again raise their own standards of honor and the way they live if we are to have any chance of impacting on their close circle of family and friends. Perhaps they become leaders and inspire more to follow their noble conduct and lives of integrity. Who knows? But there's no point in looking to society or to governments to make these changes, as sadly, they are often the ones in most need of instilling these values in the first place. Very few of them live honourably and virtuous lives of their own, so we can't look to them. So in summary then, since the 1960s, the Western world has seen a collapse in traditional forms of family and traditional values. And by traditional, I mean going back to our evolutionary instincts of those values which made small groups of people identify the leaders among them and set them up as examples, as role models by which all the people should live their lives by. In evolutionary terms, there were dire consequences for a man who left his children to the mercy of nature, as it was likely they just would not survive, and hence his DNA would carry no further. Nature would see to it that selfish men who only looked after themselves simply would have fewer chances to reproduce, as women would, as they still should be extremely cautious about who they slept with in case they became pregnant and had a child. Because for the woman too, it could mean her DNA would not survive, as she would not have anyone to provide or protect for her against nature. Now, nature has always been our strictest mistress, and we should be thankful to her, since she is. Otherwise, any of us may not even be alive today. You are the success story of a millennia of generations of evolutionary human reproduction, with harsh endings for anyone who attempted to live as she otherwise would have had it. The rise and the fall of both the Greek and the Roman empires can be indirectly linked to the breakdown of values of morality within their societies. And perhaps we too are in such an age where the lack of virtue and integrity that surrounds us will lead to our civilization's collapse. Who knows? What I would say is that to avoid any such calamity taking place, perhaps a return to the values and ethics of the Stoics must take place. Again, we cannot leave it to the education systems to teach our children these things. They would be seen as politically incorrect, I suspect. But the schools don't even teach philosophy anymore. And when they do, at university, the Stoics rarely get much of a mention. Instead, the French post-millennial schools of thought have preference. As I say, all we can control is our own behaviors. We cannot even control what happens to us in life to a large degree, as disease and tragedy can take place at any time. But what we can control is that within our own minds and our own actions. So perhaps it's time to reflect upon our roles as fathers and as families, and remember, children learn most from observing what it is you do much more than what you say. I'm pretty sure if you asked any one of those millions of fatherless children what they would love most in life, it would be, I think, a positive role model from a man. Basically, they're asking for a father or a father figure. Men, let's be fathers to our sons and our daughters, and one by one try and reverse this trend, which is leading to nothing but tragedy and heartache. Well, that's enough for this week. I'm sure you may have feelings about this issue, and perhaps you feel strongly against what I've said. I respect all opinions, and I'd love to hear from you either way. If you feel that this is indeed a crisis of our own making and can only be rectified by our own behavior in the future, or perhaps you have other thoughts and ideas on this, whatever they are, I'd love to hear from you and engage in conversations that once took place in forums all over Rome and Athens, but now only take place in 3-minute sound bites on television shows, which to me it's like attempting to crush all your inner demons with a fly swatter. No, to fight your inner demons, you must go within to the darker parts of your soul and face them in battle, often a battle to the death, with one lifestyle defeating the other. Now, which one will you choose? Thank you again for listening to me rambling on about things that I feel passionate about. I appreciate your time, for you watching me. So thank you, sincerely, from the bottom of my heart. Together, as men and women of integrity and honor, we can achieve unbelievable things. I look forward to seeing your stars rise in their ascendancy and for your legacies to be made. I'll be back next week with some more bodybuilding stories from the 1990s. So until then, take care. May your God bless you. And it's with love, truly, that I say goodbye until then. I'll see you next week.